Welcome everyone to the 34th episode of the LIBERcast. And I want to thank you before starting. I want to thank everybody who are supporting the guests and the table discussion. Everything is going very well, and I have so much gratitude for everyone who whatever your involvement in it. I appreciate. Thank you very much. Today we're gonna have another fascinating discussion with Douglas, um, and talking about the origins of the occult traditions. The well, we're gonna try to at least cover this a little bit because an hour and an hour and a half, 2 hours. It's barely enough to cover just the beginning. So before we start, I just want to bring up something. It's the Shadow Work Community website from Caroline Riley. I want uh, I want to thank you, Caroline, for your kind gesture, and I encourage people to go there if you have interest into um, your shadow working. Essentially, shadow working it's inner work. So if you have interest in that, if you're already into it in the path, I encourage you to go there. She's offering a course with great insights. I started the course and it's very good. Uh, Caroline Riley is brilliant. So I encourage you to go and on the site and explore a little bit the deepest recession of the human mind. In this way, it's your mind you're gonna explore. So thank you, Caroline, for that. So welcome back, Douglas. I appreciate the time that you're giving us to bring your precious information and wisdom. um, I think knowing about the origins of this tradition is having a knowing and knowledge about the history of the modern world and its implication. So let's not lose any time and get into it. So Brendan, not Brendan, God damn it, um, Douglas. I just want to ask you first, what would be the central point and the roots of it all?
Would you mind repeating that question, Fred? It's really great to be back on here with you, by the way.
So, what would be the center, the epicenter of occult traditions?
Well, it's absolutely Egypt. But when I say Egypt, I'm talking about the Nile Valley, and the Nile Valley is 4,000 miles long. So the Nile River flows from the Great Lakes in Central Africa, flows north and empties into the delta at the Mediterranean. So when we say Egypt, most people are thinking of northern Egypt. But when I say Egypt, typically I'm referring to the Nile River and the banks of the Nile. And the Nile River is 4,000 miles long and it flows north. So let me say this. Ultimately, we have to give all credence back to Egypt. And that's problematic because that takes us into the pre-Christian, pre-Roman world. And all of our modern paradigms are built on foundations laid in the Roman and Greek, at the beginning of classical history, essentially. And that's very late in the game, number one. Number two, our foundations are dogmatic. So ideally, all of the traditions can be traced back to Egypt, and all credence needs to be returned to Egypt. And that, like I say, is problematic because that pulls the rug out from, most of our institutionalized or established institutional paradigms. That's part of the problem. So, I'm citing that Egypt is the cradle of civilization, and
Hmm.
that's controversial. Afrocentrism is not extremely popular. It's rejected by many scholars and their ignorance. And ideally, if we really want to solve the problem, we have to get down to the truth of the matter. So all of the confusion is not only not understanding where it came from, but how it was developed and why it was developed. Um, but yeah, I hope that brings some clarity to that question.
So this is actually we can see um the affiliation and the origins reflecting onto the modern tradition, the modern occult traditions, um
Sure.
like Freemasonry and things like that. It's very they're not hiding it at all.
Right. Well, Freemasonry is a loaded term. In the modern world, basically, it's functioning as an interface between the public and municipality. And we have to understand, why we end up in a world where seemingly all the positions from the top of the pyramid hierarchy all the way down to the guy serving you a hamburger at a fast food restaurant are underqualified for the positions that they hold. So why do they want underqualified people in all these positions? Because underqualified people are more obedient. They don't think for themselves, or they're less likely to do so, and they follow orders. They're more prone to be obedient order followers. And the result of that is to end up in a world with, charlatans and underqualified, inept personnel all the way down to the ground level. And that is the phenomenon that we have.
So yes, I absolutely. I mean, uh, the involvement, the influence, the even the rewriting of history. They had to hide some parts of it.
Yeah, but it's really probably more of a case at this point that it's had just been completely lost.
Hmm.
The scholar, I mean, we have the same dilemma now that we had at the beginning of our classical history. So I'm saying that our classical history is the last 2,000 years is very late in the game in the human story. So most of what's happened that is significant is far anterior even to classical history and even to dynastic Egypt. It goes that far back, and the dilemma goes that far back. But it is, I mean, to explain it very plainly, we have a case of was our initial impulse to apply our reason, and it begins a process of truth discovery. And the earliest expressions of our sciences predate language. And as the types changed, it strays farther from source. It becomes more obscured, and then ultimately begins to be venerated into annual cycles, which compromise their chronology because it was previously time was kept in the tracking of the great year cycles, which is a 26,000 year, roughly 26,000 year pyramid. And the earliest astronomy begins at the poles and starting at the southern pole and then moving into the North Pole. So that all predates venerating in constellations west to east and east to west. So there's several factors that lead to the confusion, and it happened over a long period of time. So let me just say in this order, these hero cults that had come out of Egypt begin with the stellar cult, and they're venerating mostly in southern and northern, ultimately northern circumpolar constellations, and they do not venerate constellations east to west or west to east. Ultimately, when they do, they break their chronology because they lose the epochs that were being stored in the great year cycles of the circumpolar constellations. I know that's a mouthful and a headful, but there's a lot of factors. It's not just some, a group of dark occult evil people that squirreled away this knowledge and hid it from everybody else. The neglect is a factor too. So there was a failure in the priest class. And the priest class, they were occulting knowledge for different reasons, all the way up through the history of the mythos. And I would cite some of those reasons, maybe genuinely benevolent in the beginnings, but we can't come up with any real good reasons today to continue occulting the knowledge. However, the case of the idea of occulting knowledge is a little bit of a misnomer too, because like if we give, let's say, these so-called alternative researchers the keys to the vaults of the Vatican, that doesn't do them a whole lot of good if they don't really understand the evolution of these hero cults. They're not going to know what they're looking at any more than the scholars at the Vatican. They don't really have to understand all of that stuff. They just have to make sure that we don't. And what it is that they don't want us to understand is our sovereignty. That's what we have to really get down to is by understanding our own sovereignty, we can understand the sovereignty of others. But there's a lot of things that we will need to understand about what was happening in Egypt in order to understand how that became proliferated as dogmatic religion in the modern world. And ultimately, what I call a slide into socialism, and that socialism and bureaucracy have been responsible for the destruction of every great nation in human history. So yeah, I know it's a big subject. The main thing to understand, because you can get into a lot of conspiracy fringe, and that's where they want to put you, so they can throw you in the fringe, kook bandwagon. Anything that challenges the official narrative, they just want to marginalize it as conspiracy and try to throw you onto the fringe wingnut, bandwagon. So you have to be very careful getting caught up in conspiracies. But you ultimately need to know de facto that government is corrupt at its core, and why? Because ultimately it's a great big spiritual lesson, not a political lesson. Man is not the lawmaker. I love Mark Passio's analogy of the eating of the apple between Adam and Eve. It's not that God, so to speak, doesn't want us to know good from evil. It's that we are forbidden to arbitrate good from evil. So the best we can do is to learn natural law and then align our behavior to it. And the natural law was discovered on the banks of the Nile in remote antiquity. So when we understand these laws of morality, then we can begin to understand what these early cultures are endeavoring to do and express, and understand that it is a bona fide science and it's sublime. So they're taking measures to try to protect it from being lost, partly because it had taken so long to develop it, and partly because the consequence of losing it is basically sowing the seeds of our own destruction. So now we're faced with this task of recovering it. And I'm telling in my work that that's only been possible due to the authors like Gerald Massey and J. Norman Lockyer. It's only become possible within the last 100 years. And it's due to what we know about Babylon. In the old stellar mythos, we find the Kahuti, or glorious ones, succeeding the elemental powers, with Horus as the eighth and supreme. And these Babylonians converted into evil spirits, not understanding or having forgotten the original, the old Egyptian wisdom. And comparing Egyptian mythology with the Babylonian, the types that represent evil in the latter had represented good in the former. The old great mother of evil, called the dragon Horse in the Assyrian version, was neither the source nor the product of evil in the original. The serpent goddess Renewt as renewer of the fruits of the earth in the soil or on the tree. It is not a representation of evil. The types of good and ill were indiscriminately mixed, preeminently so in the reproduction of the old great mother as Tiamat. Originally, she was a form of Mother Earth to Art, Ta-Urt, of the Egyptians, the great mother, variously named Tiamat, Zakim, Ninkagao, and or Nana, was not originally evil. She represented the source in perfect correspondence to Ta-Urt, Apt, and Renut of Egypt, however, or howsoever hideous, was not bad or inimical to man, the mother and nurse of all, the mother of gods and men, who was the renewer and bringer forth of life in earth and water. Likewise in Egypt, the 7 Anunnaki were spirits of earth, born of the earth mother in the earth, but were not wicked spirits. The elements, which is what they represent, cannot be nor are immoral, because they're representations of elemental powers. So the idea of these serpent cults kind of springs out of the confusion of what happened in the Babylonian doctrines. And
So
it's,
I
yeah,
we
go ahead.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I just before we get I want to bring up something. The Trinity. The Trinity
Absolutely.
is everywhere in every religion, and this is one of the part there that is mutual.
That's right. That's ubiquitous in all of the
Can
traditions.
you talk to us about it a little bit?
Sure. The original Trinity was formed in the brothers, which was Horus and Set, and then Shu raises the horizon. And that basically typifies incarnation into physical existence in a 3-dimensional form. But the Trinity is the primary. And so we have to understand it all folds back into the one, but the one can't be understood without the two. So the idea is the one is dividing itself into two, which gives us duality in a physical incarnation in order to get a reflection of itself so it can understand itself, which ushers in the three. This is our Trinity. So when I'm talking about the 7, I'm talking about the Trinity on a pedestal, and that the Trinity is the only thing that belongs on top of the square. We can't put the square on top of the triangle. The triangle always goes on top of the square, and that's what the pyramid represents. The spiritual raised above the physical. It's man's aspiration, man's higher aspirations, what Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. The idea of a divine prospect is to aspire to be something more than just materialistic, something better than materialistic hedonism. The divine prospect is that we're going to apply all of our faculties to do, what is moral and right, and preserve what is moral and right. So it's all about the Trinity. And there's a lot to it, obviously, but it's very important. There's a lot more I can say about it, but let's just keep moving forward.
So yes, what were you talking about before I mentioned the Trinity? I mean,
Serpent cults.
yes. Um, I
Yeah,
mean,
there's some confusion surrounding that, but I've already explained. Part of the confusion is that the Renault, the Renew of the Egyptian was actually coming all the way out of totemic sociology. So it was a mother. It was giving birth to totems. It was the birther of the totems, or it was imaged as the birther of the totems, the mother of the totems. And then when it becomes hero cult, when it goes into the hero cult, it gets mingled with the mythology. So that is part of the confusion about these serpent cults. But there's a lot more to the serpent and the serpent symbolism, because it's, there's so many aspects of serpent. The thing I would put the most emphasis on, part about the serpent is one thing is it gets confused with Apap, which is the evil Egyptian serpent, and that's part of how it gets associated with evil. As we find in the biblical account with the serpent deceiving Eve into supposedly eating the apple, which I've already stated denotes arbitrating right from wrong rather than learning and understanding and aligning to the moral laws in nature. So part of the confusion is the serpent was confused with the evil Apap serpent that was deposed by Horus and then regurgitates all that it had consumed. And there's legends, as you said, in all of the cultures that deal with the serpent. And it's an ancient symbol. But one of the other significant things about serpent is associated with the bird is the word idea. The idea that the serpent was a phonetic, or it became a symbol of a phonetic type. So it's kind of the original alphabetic phonetic variant with the letter S. And then, of course, the form of the serpent represents a waveform. So these things, and then its shedding of its skin, or the casting of its skin, became symbolic to typify regeneration.
And
So yeah, there's a lot of aspects to the serpent, as
we
to
can
why.
see it in this pharaoh were wearing a serpent in the middle of their forehead.
Yes, with the vulture.
Yes, and they were too having this staff made. They were like in the pictures. They're having
The
a serpent
scepter.
in their hands, and there's different symbolism like that. I think that just the study of the serpent cults
That's right.
is an all other like study lifetime study. It's
It's a
incredible.
huge it's a huge study. It is. Go ahead.
So for the ones who want to get it more into that, I mean, it's everywhere. It's in the cinemas, in the movies. They're the symbolism of the serpent. There was this movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger called Conan the Barbarian, and
Yes,
there was a cult, and the two serpents that were facing together. This symbol there, it's very occult, and
it
I think there
is.
was some uh some glimpse in the pop culture. um we can see it in a lot of different symbolism, um like Michael Tessarian brought into one of this presentation about symbolism, and he shows the symbol. I don't remember quite the name of the car brand, but it's plainly there in the symbolism. You can see the serpent. I think it's I'm not like familiar with car brands, so
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to tell you either, but I'll take your word for it.
well,
I'd be interested to
we
know.
can totally plug Michael's work into that, because it's he's like an
Sure.
encyclopedia
Oh,
for this
absolutely.
himself. So
Yeah, that'll
if
keep
you
you
want to
busy a
see
while.
sacred symbolism, I think it's called. Yeah,
Mm.
somebody can correct me in the comment section. But the fascinating and mind blowing stuff there, because he's covering like all uh, all day things.
Yeah, Michael's work is vast, and I've done quite a bit of it myself, and there's quite a bit more to do. So that's an ongoing process. But to try to get the fundamentals. Ideally, we have to understand it in its purest forms, which I would tell us is between the totemic sociology and the hero myth, and that the symbolism became very ambiguous, obviously over time, and we're talking about a long period of time, so it's had plenty of time to metastasize as other forms and symbolize different aspects and different traditions. But we want to understand it, like I say, in the phonetics, it definitely is a source of our phonetics for the letter S. And that's very important because that gives us some idea how the earliest expressions were mimicking zoo types and
Yeah.
how they create perpetual archetypes and perpetual forms. Because a lot of what's happening in the earliest cultures is the endeavor to preserve the earliest forms and perpetuate them. So understanding our true creation story, we have to understand the unfoldment of archetypes, or we're left with the husk that is Darwin in theory, or something along those lines. And it's
I
that
mean, I mean,
negates the hermetic principles completely.
so knowledge about that, it's basically discernment,
Sure.
because there's the symbolism there. It can be interpreted in so many ways. We can get lost in it. I think I like your stance about the conspiracy thing there. I think it's a fascinating aspect, but we don't talk too much about the good sides of it, because there's still esoteric, beneficial esoteric knowledge that can be learned from that.
Let me say this also about the serpent. In Africa, for instance, there's what's known as a false cobra, and it is a type of snake that does mimic the venomous cobra, but it's completely non-venomous. It's also known as the water cobra. But the idea was to be able to, those things represented truth from falsehood. So the idea of knowing the true cobra from the false cobra was a matter of life and death. And it translates to the idea of knowing truth from falsehood is a matter of life and death. In fact, I would say with confidence that's where we get the term falsehood. It comes from this idea of the of, and that's one thing I wanted to say about it.
So
Um, but yeah, the serpent symbolism is ancient, and it's ambiguous, so we have to be careful. The only way we're really going to understand it is get it back into the source idea. But like I
mhm,
say, I want to put the emphasis on understanding the human story and understanding the evolution of the hero cults in the mythology. And they
mhm,
are chronologically as follows. First, stellar, where they venerate in stars and planets, which is largely starting in the south and then moving into the northern circumpolar constellations. And then in the northern circumpolar constellations, you could say that the beginning of our astronomy begins there with Draco, which is a serpent constellation divinized in the northern hemisphere as the protector of the Ursa Minor, which is where they stored the seven and all things seven, which represent all of the doctrines of Horus. And understand that the serpent was originally a type of Horus. And all of the variations of the different deities are just different representations of what we can call Horus in different aspects. So when we try to separate these things, it becomes that's where the confusion starts, because it's really all about the doctrines of Horus, and that the dragon myth, um, see, the idea of the dragon is a little different because it in the original myth it represented the two opposing elemental powers, what we think of as the brothers Horus and Set, divine or benevolent aspects of of elemental powers as well as malevolent aspects of elemental powers. But the idea is that they're the same, and when they become separated, then you start this war in heaven. Is the idea, and the doctrines are no longer understood. So the idea of a corrupted doctrine is that it's so deteriorated or unrecognizable that we can't trace it back to its pure forms, and then that leads to dogma. So, that's part of the dilemma. But serpent symbolism is fascinating. And, it's ironic that I'm talking about this because I actually, the first thing that I decided that was something that I liked in life was snakes. And I don't know if it was because I wanted to root for the underdog or whatever it was. But I did become fascinated with snakes early on, and I used to keep them as pets. And I love snakes, and I've handled venomous snakes. I have limitations. I won't handle cobras, but I will handle rattlesnakes or copperheads. I used to catch them, but I studied them for a long time, and I spent most of my childhood trying to get people out of the ignorance of not knowing the difference between a harmless and a venomous snake because they were killing snakes that were not poisonous, thinking they were copperheads. So I started out trying to educate people about snakes. And here I am, still trying to educate people about now serpent symbolism, which is vast, but there's a similar dilemma where it puts people in fear, and then the fear seems to render them with the inability to reason and rationalize. So it's interesting. It's very strange that it's working out that way for me, but I wanted to mention that to you.
Fascinating. And I think I mean, when I started to study more the occult, I think this part was one of the first I touched on. But I went to a couple of sources, maybe two or three, and then my understanding of it, I don't have much time to study it. I'm for now, and I think if people would understand how much it's involved in our um let's and by the way, for the people, Horus, the word was transformed for another word, and it's hour, the hour of the day. So
Yeah, the Horus zone is the horizon.
horizon, yes, exactly.
So that is the zone of Horus, which is where we derive the term hour, and the minute comes from moon. And then
It
the
was
second hand comes from Thoth or Mercury, the quicksilver.
Mon was the name of the moon in this. I don't remember, it was quite the Egyptian, but in a certain time, and I don't remember which people what was that, but it was called Mon. So you have month that come from
Right.
that.
That's
So
right.
I mean, it's everywhere. And when I'm talking to people about this, and I'm telling you, astrotheology and the study of occult tradition are, it's so important. It's so in your face when you have the eyes to see it. I mean, um, even the story of Jesus and the how much bastardized the history of the Egyptian was into the mainstream. Uh, there was things that were completely false, and when you look into the history, and you start to go into it's revision revisionism, history revisionism. I
Yes.
think I think it makes the thing more complete. And Douglas, would you call yourself an is revisionist historian?
No, I wouldn't. I'm not trying to alter the classical history. I am trying to recover the lost history, which is the greatest part of the human story. And there's really not really apparently too many people that seem to understand it. So no, I'm not spilling anybody's milk with my claims because they don't really understand what they're talking about. They don't really have a constituency to support their claims. So it's not accepted as even in the scriptures or the sacred texts. That's ambiguous, and not enough scholars agree on it. So I'm not contending with it in that way because there's no constituency. I'm explaining it the way I understanding it, or the way I'm understanding it. But let me say another thing about the importance of serpent symbolism. I just got John Anthony West's book, The Serpent in the Sky, and I would have to say that is a reference to Draco, which I am citing as basically the beginning of astronomy, and that it was designed as the guardian protector of Ursa Minor to wrap itself around Ursa Minor. So the significance of that is in the seven, and why the seven was so important to the stellar cult people, which I cite as the pyramid builders. So part of my claim is that the pyramids were built by the first Egyptian hero cult, which were stellar and venerating in Ursa Minor, ultimately in the number seven. And we're not going to try to fully flesh out the seven, but I'm going to mention a few things to bolster my claim, partly the Serpent Mounds. And that the Serpent Mounds that we find throughout the world are still found in some of the existing tribes, like the Arunta tribe in Australia have it in their ritual, and that England had been proliferated with serpent mounds, including one that was 10 miles long. And these mounds have been carved up and declared to be fort hills. That's how bad this ruling class doesn't want you to understand the mound builders, because they were stellar people that came from Egypt. And they proliferated this serpent symbolism all throughout the world. And the serpent mound that we have right near me here in Chillicothe, Ohio, I went down there and bought Ross Hamilton's book, The Mystery of the Serpent Mound, and he signed it for me. And Graham Hancock was there giving a talk on his new book before it came out on the Americas. I can't remember, but it's the newest book of Graham Hancock on the Americas. Before America, I think it was called. And Graham did a talk there, and it was fascinating, and he's a really gracious fellow to meet. And it was a great experience for me, but I wanted to explain the symbolism of that serpent mound is about a snake going into a hole. And I'm just going to plainly say that the serpent typifies, this is hard to understand, but I've said it before, it's in my work. This typifies the knowledge being transferred from the god of the South Pole into the god of the North Pole. So what that means is the mound builders, and the serpent mound builders in particular, were basically the middle phase of the stellar cult, as the knowledge was being taken out of the south and moved into the north. So the serpent mound actually means the god of the North Pole deposing the god of the South Pole. But keep in mind, these are just aspects of the same deity. So when we separate this begins the confusion. But that is actually what the serpent mound is built to denote, is that the knowledge had been changed into the north. So it's a contingency for that knowledge becoming lost as a result. I wanted to say that. And I also wanted to mention that there is still one serpent mound in Scotland, but that the other mounds in England have been mostly carved up and turned into what they call fort hills. And they want to And they put it in the history as though these were actually, built from the ground up to be, wrap it in quotes, Ford Hills, and it's the pinnacle of ignorance, for people to accept this. These were mounds, is the point I'm making. So go ahead.
So I took notes there because I learned a lot of things. It's even for me. I mean, this is so. I just because there's so much stuff to cover there, and I just want to bring because you talk about the hero myth there. Uh, just want to like to elaborate a little bit on that. The solar hero. Is this what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, you're hitting on it when you get into the astrotheology. The way you were trying to portray the Christ story in the astrotheology, that is a result of the corruption of the solar hero myth. So that's a solar doctrine in a literalized, historicized form, which represents the corrupted form, because in the literization and the historization, we lose the teaching. But let me say another thing about the origins of all this. If I haven't forgotten already, but yeah, it's critical because it is. We do have to understand these what we can call fertility cults. We have to understand fertility rites, and then we have to understand that not understanding the result of not understanding these fertility rites is dogmatic religion. And I kind of want to bring this home into the modern world and the way this is played out over time, because what we have is the new cults as it evolves trying to bring on the old into the new, and then the expressions are evolving, and we're moving farther away from source. Eventually the types are so drastically different from the original and then become anthropomorphized, it completely obliterates the original forms, or we stray so far from source that we lose the original teaching. But the real human story is an ongoing process. So overlapping of these cults is part of that story. And I'm going to mention Arthur Evans' work here. Arthur Evans' work was breakthrough discovery of Minoa in Crete and the Minoan civilization. And we want to pay attention as to why that was left out of classical history, because it's a scathing indictment to the classical paradigm, because they basically had ignored Crete and what happened in Crete, where they still had stellar traditions strong intact. So that's part of it. But what we have is a story of this overlapping and then this continuation of this, or this rise of what we can call this cancel culture. So I wanted to talk a little bit about cancel culture, because it's, the burning of the Alexandrian libraries and all the destruction of the knowledge coming all the way into the modern world is achieved by whipping the ignorant masses into a fervor and then storming the temples and just obliterating everything. And in doing so, we've erased the greatest part of our history, cut ourselves off from our ancestry, all at the bidding of our dark occult sorcerer master psychologists. And that's all they have to do. So we want to understand Nietzsche's essay on the use and abuse of history, on how things are monumentalized into the present, or criticized in the past or in the present, and or antiquated into antiquity and left in the sands of the Sahara. So we have to understand how they've used this cancel culture to destroy the biggest part of our human story, and it's happening right now. They're pulling down monuments and statues. This is how they do it. But so the real human story is partly this overlapping of these evolving cults, but also this cancel culture is a very dangerous prospect. And these ideas, book burnings and things like that, is what we got to be careful with. So I wanted to kind of bring it back to that, because that's what's happening in our modern world. And let me mention this too, because I heard you guys talking about the Gordian Knot on one of your roundtables. And just going to say this very briefly and generally. But the main thing that I wanted to mention about the Gordian Knot, which was a knot that allegedly became associated with Alexander. Basically, it represents a metaphor of an intractable problem, and then rendering the problem moot with a practical solution. But I wanted to point out that part of the understanding of the Gordian knot is understanding the dangers of pragmatism. The idea that Alexander had cut the knot it was a fast solution to an intractable problem, but it may have created more problems than it solved. So I want to just point out that the idea of the Gordian knot is about the dangers of pragmatism. Pragmatism being the idea that the most practical way to do something isn't necessarily the most moral way to do something. Like if they want to lay down the railroad tracks, but it's going through your living room, well, the pragmatic, practical solution is just to lay down the tracks, but that's not moral. So I wanted to mention that about the Gordian knot is about the dangers of pragmatism, what I call Roman pragmatism, but in this case, it's Greek, So I wanted to mention that while I came on here with you today.
I mean, is it not what this world is building on?
Absolutely. This idea of progressivism, which they want to associate with the leftist ideal, but it's, both of these so-called parties are all in when it comes to, their idea of prosperity is a monetary prospect. So their idea of a better world tomorrow is a financial prospect. And that's where we get this idea of progressivism, which really just represents rabid socialism, which is, the idea that man can arbitrate law and that we need an army corps of engineers. So everything has to be built and controlled by the military. There's a lot to it, but, these are part of the issues that we're dealing with.
So we have, cannot see the name, but there's something. Thanks you for the clarification on the Guardian Knot, by the way. It has been a part of the conversation on the table discussion, and let's talk about this a little bit. There's gonna be a weekly table discussion about the occult and about really eclectic. Maybe I decided more to emphasize solution on to this, because we talk a lot about the bad things that happen and the bad context of things, but essentially we it's okay to talk about the bad things, but I think bringing more solutions and discussion and arguments and debates, I think it's very healthy, even more into this realm there, the realm of the occult. I think there's a lot of different sources that can be studied, and nobody has the same path, and I I just want to invite people who are listening to this, if you're interested, and well, you need to talk English for now, because I don't have the table discussion in French, but in English, uh, it's open. The discussion is open to all to partake in it. So I'm having a brochette of beautiful people who are partaking in it, and I thank you guys to partake in it. So what we can expose all the things that they're doing. I think the one part that keeps on coming back is ignorance.
Absolutely. That is the genuine adversary that we're faced with.
I mean, these, whatever the intention they had, they still concealed the origins and the information about the occult.
Well, yes, they are hiding knowledge that can help us flesh it out,
Yes.
but they don't have the scholars that are able to do so. So ideally, it comes down to the individual. How bad do
Hmm.
you want truth? What are you going to devote your life to? Are you going to devote your life to hedonistic pursuit? Or are you going to devote your life to solving this real human dilemma that we have? And how much time do you actually think you have left? Um, and I understand your concern about that, Fred. I'd like to let me read something to this, and I'll bring this home back where we can both talk about this. But I wanted to read a little bit of this to you. This is from Albert Churchward. Another type of Horus image as that of the great serpent was formulated during the stellar cult. That means before the pyramids were built more than 150,000 years ago. Not the evil or bad serpent Apap, but the zootype form of the child of the zootype serpent, Mother Renut. So there were two types of the serpent, one that represented the child and then one that represented the adult. This is where we get the idea of the serpent in Quetzalcoatl as the bird. But the serpent brood or dragon of progeny was of Renut, a type of the earth goddess, as the serpent mother are mentioned in the ritual, where they have become a subject of ancient knowledge in the mysteries. There are no seven serpents of death or seven evil spirits in Egypt, but these in Akkad and Babylonia were made the progeny of Tiamat. So the Babylonians have misconstrued the Egyptian and replaced the elemental powers in Egypt with evil spirits in Babylon. Now, I wanted to mention the caduceus because it has serpent symbolism. The first thing I want to say is that every tyranny starts as a medical tyranny. And I said that over 12 years ago to myself. I wasn't doing any public work, but I said it to somebody, probably Nathan or Brandon or both. And it was one of the first realizations that I had. So every tyranny begins as a medical tyranny. So the fact that we have this serpent symbolism in the caduceus is a monopolization, what I call, of the entire medical industry, which is partly a phenomenon of the hospitalers coming out of the Middle Ages. And I want to mention that because now in the modern world, the hospital is the point of centralization. What does that mean? It means that government is a process and that everything government endeavors to do is to get you into that process. And the hospital is the point of centralization, which means eventually you're going to have to engage with the point of centralization, which puts you into the government process. And that the caduceus with a single serpent is not, because the idea of medicine is about bringing to the middle, hence the word med is middle. So the idea of real healing is about, finding balance within. Everything in the universe is about ordering balance. So the idea of the serpent is about the balance of the two serpents. And the idea of the wand of Hermes and all this becomes the caduceus. We look at the caduceus today, we find it with a single serpent, and I want to tell you that is a complete bastardization of the idea of medicine. It represents to me primacy in the north, which means masculine dominance. It's not necessarily a world dominated by men. It's a world dominated by steely intellect, which is bereft of emotion and compassion and intuition. But it's a corrupted form, the caduceus with the single serpent. It's a disgusting symbol of a disgusting industry that we know as today's medical industry, which is nothing but order following trash. And they're guilty of crimes against humanity, and they're so powerful, and we see that the entire media platforms on the television are all sponsored by the pharmaceutical companies. And there's not way to really single any one of them out. They're all in it together. One hang, they all hang. So they're a formidable adversary. But I'm telling you that they're very corrupted. They've been reduced to order following trash, and in that way they are more deplorable and more disdainful even than these order followers that don the government costumes, to crack skulls for the state. They are an abomination to the creator. They do represent and constitute a priest class in white lab coats, and because you're talking about life and death, it's a claim to the Most High. So every tyranny begins as a medical tyranny, and boy, do we have one on our hands now.
It's the new priesthood.
Damn right it is.
They're bringing you the truth. They're controlling the truth now.
Yeah, they want to be the arbitrators of truth by
I
using esoteric knowledge that they're only privy to,
can
and
you
it's a
can you
claim to the
remember
Most High.
can you remember that during this fucking hell we went through the two latest years?
Can I
The
remember what?
this the priests that are they were dancing.
You damn
They
right I
were dancing
remember.
and celebrating.
Yeah.
It's it's incredible, and
Oh, I know.
people liked it.
Yeah, people
You know,
don't. I mean, they still trust the mainstream media. They don't even have a clue that when they turn on the mainstream media, the reason that they can't understand it is because they don't understand they're having their nose rubbed in shit. And they
yeah,
don't want to face the fact that they're having their nose rubbed in shit.
they're
And I hope you
I
don't mind, me using the
no
language.
no and it's good that we bring that now because these people are frauds.
To
You
say
know,
the least. That would be the understatement of the century.
I mean,
They're disgusting charlatan trash, is better
I
stated.
I confronted. I just want to put a little something. I confronted my family doctor. I told her, you will not get away with this. You know, you're some in sometimes if you encourage this death cult, if you push people on the side of the raven and and using coercion and blackmailing and things like that, because this is what they did. They did like the
And are
Catholic
doing.
priest.
Yes. Yes.
This is the
And are doing.
same fucking garbage. They cannot be trusted. They cannot be.
That's right. They destroyed all of their integrity if they ever had any in the first place.
I mean,
They have no
just
integrity left.
just this comment there, because it's so true.
They
Killing
made they
people
made
through
Joseph
idols of
Mengele.
radiation.
Yeah, they made Joseph Mengele blush.
I
It's
mean,
it's so overt. The phenomenon that we're facing and coming to terms with is that people, it's right in front of them and they still can't see it. That's because we're talking about psychology and Stockholm syndrome and
yep,
Helsinki syndrome or whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of denial. There's a lot of psychology involved, and I understand the psychology, but we're not going to get into all of that now. But ideally, we're going to have to learn and align with natural law and understand that the only thing that brings true healing is balance and bringing it into the middle. Well, if you believe in government and you support government, you're completely out of balance.
yep.
And you probably deserve what you're going to get.
I mean, how blatant can it be? You know,
Exactly.
it's
What
you
they're
called
doing
it overt, like it's way over
in your
that.
face. It's in
It's
your face because part of the strategy is called over the top. So the idea of over the top is you can't see the forest for the trees. They put it so close to your face you can't see the forest for the trees. But also they're rubbing your nose in shit so you're traumatized. And like the Arthurian legend surviving into the modern world. The way that they're dealing with that now is they put it so close to your face we can't see the forest for the trees, but we're ensconced in the Arthurian symbolism. It's everywhere. That's another subject, but I just used it as an example. But yeah, that's the technique, is over the top. It's so outrageous. It's so unbelievable. We can't see the forest for the trees. We can't process it. We're in deep shit.
I mean, I said that like I'm saying it all the time. I
Well,
mean,
you're not
I mean,
wrong, my friend.
all 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 the occultists, all the great workers that are listening now, you open your ears, man. Seriously, there's some new agers, you know, that are coming to you and they're saying, "Oh, there's a great awakening." People are waking.
Yeah, they're woke, rapid in quotes, and now that's
I
been
mean,
thrown into the fringe conspiracy wingnut kooks, and they're all going to be thrown on the alt right bandwagon and basically,
I mean,
classified as conspiracy wingnut kooks. It's a
there,
technique.
yeah.
If we can understand the technique, let me say this too: by their ends, you will know their means. So when you understand what they want, which is control, then you'll understand the means. So when you hear people using terms like fake news, they told you, even the president came out and told you it's fake news. What he didn't tell you, it's government controlled. The same people that own your government own that news company. So they're all towing the same line. And it's already polarized into the dialectic because you got CNN, towing the leftist ideology and bullshit, and then the Fox for the right. It's all anybody that sees any differences in these parties or these media platforms, which are not real journalism, they're government propaganda. That's what the government didn't tell you. It's government propaganda. But the idea that it's all fake, and that's part of the cancel culture mentality. They just want you to throw it all out, flush it all down the toilet, and not use any discernment and judgment to understand. But like I say, in the news, you can believe the policy is real. The events and the daily events and all that. That's could be very arbitrary. Probably is. But the main thing is you can count on the policy. That's what they want. And if that's not the policy they want, then they're using it to scare you into the other policy that they want. But ideally, whatever policy you get, that was their ends, and everything else was a means to that is questionable. The means is to the end is questionable, but by their ends, you will know their means, and their ends are control. So we have to understand that, and it's because we're living in a world of naive, shit diapered children.
Yep.
They're not coming to terms with that. And they're clinging to that dead corpse called government, And
I
well,
mean,
you
I mean,
get me on a tirade here.
I mean, man,
you must.
I just want to like the schism is so deep.
Yes, it is.
I mean, the spiritualists and the gurus that are there, they're talking shit. They're talking like it's verbal asinine.
That
It's
verbal diarrhea, the way
Bible
Passio states it.
exactly.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
agree.
if you're not
Dross.
if you're not talking about freedom now, if you're not trying to like grow up, and make sure you, it's worthless. Because I'm telling you,
Yeah, it's rhetorical. Go ahead.
I like Douglas. I'm years into it. I'm years into shadow work and occult. Not as much as what, but I see through the veil of deception,
Sure, you do. I know you do.
and I see it everywhere. I see it everywhere. And
Eh,
living in a world like that, being conscious as we are, it's no easy job. Because
No,
I found the discussion and the by the way, news, I think it means northeast, west, south.
that's correct. Nothing new under the sun.
Exactly. Just want to bring that at the same time. So I was talking with this my French friend yesterday about the meaning of the words and how powerful words are. I mean spelling, casting a spell. This is all they're doing. They're not doing it physically. They're brainwashing people, and they're not even in their area. They can be at the other side of the world, and people get hypnotized.
Yeah.
It's crazy, and it's not only the
No.
delta waves of the TV. It's the use of symbolism and green language, and
Well, it's really the ignorance of the symbolism that allows it to be wielded as
yes,
power over us. So the only way to really reconcile that is to restore it to source. But like I say, they don't have to understand the symbols, or they don't have to understand the mysteries. All they have to do is make sure you don't. It's like the Carlos Castaneda quote: all the sorcerer has to do is give you his mindset, which is to keep you in dual consciousness or cognitive dissonance. Um,
I mean the Trinity. Let's coming back to that, and let's put it in a modern context. So you have the thought, the action, and the emotion.
okay.
So in this, if you miss one of those in
Hmm.
this equilibrium, in this balance,
Hmm.
you're a slave essentially.
Right.
So
This is
what I want,
the 777 versus the 666.
I mean, the duality and all these things, I think they're part of um a bigger plane, and it's everywhere. The schism, the duality, there's a healthy duality, and there's an unhealthy duality. I mean, if we don't have this counter force, we cannot outgrow. Only if, I mean, you cannot see the light until you plunge yourself in the darkness.
That's right. The light is at the heart of darkness, or at the center of the heart of darkness.
Exactly. So essentially, if we live in ignorance of these patterns and uh, these phenomena that we're living, and you're refusing to look at the truth, and you refuse to look into the darkness, essentially you're going to be a slave of your own ignorance. Nobody else is doing it.
That's right. It
I
comes down to the ground level.
People, there's some things that I want to bring up, because people are playing this victimization card
That's
all the
it.
time.
That's it.
What I
And
want to say,
the biggest one is that we're a victim of our genes.
well, I mean eugenicists, they're scared little children, you know
Well,
they know.
that's the dogma that they're teaching in the universities, in the medical colleges,
Exactly.
is that we're controlled by genes. That is the central dogma in medicine. And it
It's
was
spiritual infancy, like would
right.
say Mark.
Well, it was popularized, I think, in 1962, the Francis Crick Thomas Watson theories of genetics, that we were controlled by genes. And the Egyptians understood this was not true, that we're not controlled by genes, that we can consciously override our gene expression, but not in base consciousness. So the only way that's possible is to reconnect, to the subconscious, and raise, into a balanced spiritual understanding as a being, and then our consciousness is powerful enough to rewrite our gene expression.
I mean the Stockholm syndrome is
That's it.
on steroid now.
You
you
got
know
that
we
right.
we thought it was bad, but when in the last 2 years, I my jaw just
Yeah.
dropped.
Yeah,
I
we
was
thought
like,
this would wake
oh my
people up.
god.
We thought this was going to wake more people up, and all I see is people doubling down in their ego.
I mean, I'm telling, this is what I do. I gather information my spiritual growth, and I'm teaching, not really teaching, but I'm showing people some doors, and the response about it is it's pathetic. I mean, you have people who are stuck into this victimization, infantilism pattern. You're
That's right.
you I just want to bring that there, because this is one of the things that people bring the most is, you, you think you're a slave, you are a slave. The principle of correspondence, the principle of mentalism,
Right.
the principle of rhythm.
As you think,
If
so
you
you feel, so you act.
So if you think that you're a victim, if you think yes you're a slave, you are a slave.
Well, most people don't think of it in those terms, but I know what you're saying.
I
I do know what you're saying.
there,
Most
there's
people most people's idea of slavery is black chattel slavery in the Civil War era
yes.
or colonial America era. They think it's having a job, slave to the grind. They don't think that the conditions on earth are just inherently right now slavery. They don't understand it like you do, most people, because they don't understand natural law. And that's what we're trying to express. Most people are still in thrall. They're still believing the mainstream media. They still believe in the American dream, is what I'm getting at. So,
I mean, and it is everywhere.
oh, yeah,
This emasculation of the masses.
that's right.
You know, the masculine qualities has been chopped off of the culture, have been cut off of the education of the young, and by TV
And
and by
sports.
radio and
Sports.
newspapers. The what?
The sports is what,
Yeah,
is usurping most of the masculine energy.
yeah, and yes, yeah, absolutely,
And that's what it's
absolutely.
designed to do. That is the role that it's designed to fill. And that is the goal that it seeks to achieve. Not just distractions, but to literally usurp that masculine energy out of men.
It's that the action.
Yes, the action principle. That's right.
So if you have people roaming around and they're saying, "Oh, the government did that to me," "Oh, the neighbors did that to me," it's the people who are evil. Well, essentially, if you let these things happen to you, it's your fault.
That's right. By not saying no, you're tacitly saying yes.
I- Ignorance isn't a justification at all,
That's right.
ever.
It's an act of sheer willpower. To ignore
Absolutely,
is to
absolutely.
an act of sheer willpower.
And
It's refusal of truth.
yep,
And
and you have these people that in during the 2 last years that they decided that they were getting even more ignorant, dangerously ignorant, dangerously emasculated, and defeminized at the same time. The assault is coming from everywhere. It's coming from the health, the food, the medical
that's right. It's a
context.
cocktail.
It's a spiritual warfare, because
Absolutely.
human now are completely enslaved. The only thing that miss to have the control is free will, and they're getting very near their goal.
That's
They're
right.
gonna they're gonna kill it.
That's
You
right.
know,
It's all about breaking the will. That's what 1984, George Orwell's 1984 is really dealing with. It's all about breaking the will. So part of the spiritual lesson that we have to learn from this is, number one, never let it come to this. We should have never let it come to this. But the fact that it has, now we got to deal with it. But the other part of the spiritual lesson is, if we can extricate ourselves from this position, then that will be a testament to the power of the human will to turn things around or to not be broken. That's all we have left to hope for, is that the
So,
human
what
will
do you think
cannot be
would
broken.
what do you think would be the first thing that we, as humans, as a civilization, should do first to heal this schism?
I would have to say learn natural law
Indeed.
and understand the spiritual principles of morality. It's a science. So we don't have an excuse that justifies us not understanding this science. It is a science, it's a verifiable science. So the only way that we don't understand this science is by leaving it off the table and occulting it or sequestering it and keeping it from the masses. But like I say, the responsibility comes down to the ground level at the individual level. Um, so part of the dilemma that we have is self-love. There's a lack of self-love. So, I realize that these people have allowed themselves to degenerate into communist trash, and that's what they've become. But, you know, ideally they have to find self-love and love themselves enough to want freedom and want truth, not only for themselves, but for others. So, as much as they have become trash, calling them trash is probably not going to help them out too much. So, we do have to find a way to self-empower them and encourage them to seek the knowledge and learn the knowledge. And ideally, education is the only real solution. And because there's psychology involved, people
Sure.
are refusing the truth. They're in denial. So you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You can lead a student to truth, but you can't make him think. Ideally, they have to be empowered with self-love, and that's a difficult prospect.
We will have to teach by actions,
Yeah,
because words cannot go that far in a mind that it's gonna get lost between anxiety and angst and
yeah.
stress and overthinking. You know, I think giving the example is the better way to do it. That's
Okay,
why.
you're talking about transformational leadership versus transactional leadership. Transactional leadership being punishment and reward, which is what all government systems are based on.
Absolutely.
That's transactional leadership. You're talking about transformational leadership. Um, yeah, I mean, there's a difference between a way of life and learning truth. One way you could say it is if you devote yourself to learning truth, well, you'll probably live a fairly serene, divine way of life because you probably won't have time to do anything else and it'll keep you out of trouble. But what I'm saying is, that's important. But everybody's at a different phase in their journey, and there's a lot of variables, a lot of factors. So we don't want to create an unrealistic, modus operandi that's unattainable. We don't want to set unattainable goals, is what I'm saying. But you're not wrong in what you're saying. And I
Indeed.
know, I know you, Fred. I know you're very serious about morality. I know you're very serious about getting right down to the heart of everything that is causing harm in this world. And I don't disagree with you on that, any of that.
It's not. I'm not saying imposing things.
No, I know that. I know you're not. But
It's it's.
yeah, go ahead.
I mean, i- let's say I agree with you. The first thing that we should do is learning natural law.
Yep.
Well, learning natural law to adults that are already broken, already brainwashed,
Yeah.
is almost useless. You're gonna have a a handful of them, you're gonna have a, 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 a paltry few of them, and if you start teaching it to children, you start to teach them the golden rule and then natural law and all these things, and children are very smart. They
Yes,
can
they are.
understand. They can understand patterns.
That's right.
They can understand. Children know when they're lying to them. Okay, they're not
Well, they're
they're
not afraid to ask questions,
exactly.
and they're not conditioned or indoctrinated in the formative years.
And I want to bring something up because Brendan Martin talked about it. It's the death of the child in the freedom movement. He brought up, and when he talks about the children, I think he talks the inner children, this um, this playful part
Yeah,
of ourselves. This let tell me if I'm wrong about this. Okay, so this is my interpretation of it, but pretty much the children are the best teachers because they're unscathed, unaffected by the um the the, uh, the the propaganda and the heavy indoctrination. So
that's true.
they're gonna show you truth, and they're gonna tell you, not not necessarily by vocal means. They're gonna show you by example. This is my experience with children. Okay, I'm looking at my children go, and look how they're manipulating things, and when they're climbing and they're making mistakes, they're not asking themselves thousands of philosophical questions. They're working on principles, essentially.
That's
That
right. They're looking for something to ground themselves to or adhere to.
this is objective, the objective way of living life. It's like, like in the book, The End of All Evil. He takes the example of what is principles. Principle are truth. Like,
That
you're gonna walk on a path. Let's say you walk on a path, and then you look at the ground and you see rocks, and then you want to go through there to go on the other side of the path. The first time you're gonna do it, you're probably stumble upon one of them is gonna move, and you're maybe gonna stumble a little bit. But essentially, when you're going back there again, you're not gonna like do the same thing again. It's the same thing as human psychology is just like that. You know, we're overcomplicating things that are
right. If
very
we're repeating the
simple.
same mistakes, then there's psychology involved. Is I think is what you're saying, and
Yeah,
that
we're actually
the children aren't indoctrinated into the dogma yet, so
exactly.
they're not affected by the psychology. They have potential to make a better decision as a result. Is what I'm getting out of what you're saying. But there's a lot more to say about that. Let me say something about that.
Sure.
The idea that you're talking about keeping the child alive. Well, we call this the one great work. And it's the last thing that I would choose to do with my time. People think I want to do this because I think it's fun or I'm looking for social interactions or whatever. I'll tell you, this is the very last thing I would choose to do with my time. I'm not saying that I don't care about truth, but if we want truth, we're going to have to labor for it quite as hard as we labor for gold. And it's not something that I would really choose to do. But faced with the situation that we're facing, I don't really see any other choice at this point. But I want to say that the idea that we want to keep the child alive, be cautious with that because they're promoting the idea that you should never have to grow up or you don't ever have to grow up.
Hmm.
That all there is to life is, get an education, get a career, and then retire and live out your golden years, blowing your savings in a casino or something or on Golden Pond or whatever. But I'm just saying we have to understand that ideally we have to become mature. Ideally, we have to become the adult. And in that way, we got to cut that child loose and become the adult. This is why the idea of the Horus was imaged as two types: the Horus as the child, and then Horus as the adult, because they're two drastically different things. But I'm not saying that that doesn't mean you still can't have any fun in life. It is work, and it's hard work. It's the hardest work there is to do, but don't think of it as work. You don't have to think of it as work. The whole point is just to enjoy yourself. I always
I,
think of that scene
I'm
in
I'm
Animal
not
House, in the golf lesson in Animal House. But go ahead.
I'm not saying that to fall into total hedonism.
No, I know that. I know that. But I'm trying to make it clear so no one
Yeah,
takes it that way. But
because
and I agree with that. I agree that we should still, have fun and be able to be amused. But when there's slavery going on and we want to go to a football game and paint ourselves blue and act like a damn drunken idiot, that says a lot about what type of a person that you really are, and that you really genuinely don't care about freedom. And the other thing I want to say about children is, number one, my wife has a very good children's book, and you can find that book at givetonaturebbook.com. And it's a great book, and it basically is kind of like the Kabbalion for kids, and it's great. It's very brilliantly
what's her name?
illustrated. Indica.
Oh yeah, sure. I contacted her. I offered her to translate it in French, but it didn't go further. It's yes, I've seen the book. It's very
I
good.
believe she has it translated in French, and I'd like to have you give it
Yes.
a look over it and then see if you have any discrepancies in it. But I think what she was telling you, if she did, that it was already had gone to publication, so we'd have to revamp it to
Yeah.
get you
Oh,
to,
the-
retranslate it for us. But we're interested, so I want to mention that. But let me say one other thing before I forget.
yes.
The idea that the children are our future. Yes, that's true, but I want to point out that the children cannot fix this problem, and the children cannot be expected to fix this problem. This problem was created by adults, and children simply cannot understand the things that it's going to take to fix this problem. The idea of the age of 30 is the age of enlightenment. This corresponds to
Absolutely.
the idea of the Christ being of the age of 30. There's truth in it, which means that certain things cannot be understood before the age of 30 because you simply don't have enough gnosis in life experience. So the idea that the children are going to fix all these problems that are created by the adults, it's bunk. And you're trying to throw the responsibility on to the children. Yes, the children are our future, but if we as adults don't take the responsibility to deal with this and we're the only ones that can, then we don't give a shit about the children. You want to tell your children you love them and you're not interested in solving this problem, save your breath, because it's not true. You can't love your children without first having a relationship with truth. You can't love anything without first having a relationship with truth. You can say it, but that doesn't make it
Absolutely.
true. It might make somebody feel better, but that doesn't make it true because it's not true. And the amount that we understand the solution to this problem, which is knowledge, is the metric for how much we actually care. But that's also relative to how many years we've been on the planet. So the idea of the age of enlightenment is the age of 30, which means basically anybody under that age is really underqualified to deal with this problem. And they're not really responsible for it either. It's the
What
adults that created the problem. It's the adults that are going to have to be reached. And I know that sounds like a difficult prospect, but that's why it's called the great work.
absolutely, it's beautiful. Beautiful. I couldn't have said it better than that. But uh getting back to the children, we I agree with you. We have to use discernment and a judgment to balance this part there, because you have this playful, um uh innocent part of the children that it's it makes them more connected to the source, more um,
Yes.
and you have, and the other side, you have infantilization. Then you're infantilizing adults, you're keeping them as children. I at the risk of repeating myself, I consider that most people are aged between 6 and 7 years old in I mean maturity, intellectual maturity.
I know what you mean, and it would be hard to disagree with you, but I want to just say that we can see clear in the programming that they want you to arrest your development at the age of 19. And that's right between, people finding a real spiritual prospect. That's usually about the time people are stuck in atheism. And
Yes.
it's no irony, but at that point, like I say, they're promoting the ideals of a career and then a retirement and then living out your golden years, with some money in the bank. But the idea is that they want you to arrest your development and tell you at that point you don't have to grow up. And what they mean by that is care about things that matter. And they sell it under the guise of go out and have fun in life, or there's still fun to be found in life. But that's not really what they're doing. What they're really doing is destroying the essence of your soul and the core of your being by telling you that you don't have to care about anything but money and government.
They're subsidizing uh, parental guidance by materialistic means.
I agree.
So you have a bunch of children, including me, who have not been raised by my parents. I was raised by strangers.
Well, we can't give something that we don't have. So if your
Exactly,
parents
you're
don't
right.
don't don't have it to give to you, then they're not able to give it to you. And I'm trying to put it into the equation of self-love. It is a metric of self-love. How much we want truth is a metric of how much we care about ourselves. And how much we care about ourselves is a metric of how much we care about progeny and posterity. It should be the other way around. How much we care about progeny and posterity is a metric of how much we care about ourselves or how much we care about truth. But that is the metric. How much we understand the solution, how much knowledge we have to bring to fleshing out the solution is the metric of how much we actually care. So,
I mean, there's the other side of the children that we didn't talk about:
sure,
selfishness.
yes.
Children at the age of my children right now, they're very selfish. Okay, but it's part of what growing up is. They're developing their ego. Okay, they're developing what they're creating their world. They're creating their world in their minds. All the time, all day, because
They're
they're
looking for
growing.
boundaries, is what they're really doing.
Exactly, right. But essentially, um, what we're doing when you're doing the spiritual path is a very egoic, because we're self-centered in this. It's not I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's still selfish. When you're doing something you helping someone, you're still doing it for yourself.
Well, the idea in some of the studies they've shown that the children get more joy out of giving than receiving.
Sure.
But I think
Absolutely.
I know what you're saying. But yeah, but the idea is we're all connected ideally, and that our progeny and our posterity is our personal individual future. Unless we are atheistic and we only identify with the physical body, then
Yeah,
we don't have to care about any of that stuff. But if we recognize that it's all connected and that we're all just really part of the same organism, and that our progeny and posterity is our own personal future, the whole point is about planting trees and of which the shade will never sit in, that we care more about leaving this planet and the people in it in a better place than we found it in.
absolutely.
It's a divine aspiration. It's a divine prospect. It's the higher aspects of our potential.
It's
So
yes,
adopting hedonism or adopting atheism or adopting moral relativism or social Darwinism,
yes.
these are yeah, and then justifying that under with animal behavior. That's our lowest possible expression. And we're not the same as the animals in the animal kingdom, and we have, so for us to try to arrest our development there actually puts us below the animals because we have a role in nature to fill, and we
Well,
are we are stewards of the earth. So if we fail, then everybody suffers.
animals don't stab each others in the back for a shake.
And they don't hunt for sport.
No. Well, felines do. You know, we see it. They're killing just for pleasure of killing.
I wouldn't say they're doing it for pleasure, maybe for practice, but and we see
Hmm.
the killer
Exactly.
whales. Sometimes they bat their victims around, have a little fun, but I don't think it's a pleasure or a sport. I think it's either a practice or it's an exercise, but it's also a testament to the ominous power of the beast, whatever it may be. It's also a territorial maneuver. It's not just some selfish, ambition of the creature. It's part of its nature and it's acting on instinct. So
Hmm. Well, I mean, selfishness is. Do you? I don't think animals as this quality or I don't think animals are selfish. This is
that's what
not
I'm
what I'm
trying
saying.
to
I
say.
think it's
Main thing
when
is they're acting on instinct, and we don't have that excuse. So stop
no,
using it.
exactly. You're right. It's. I mean, I'm talking to people, and when you have neurotism, I think it is the part that it's the worst in all of that. That it's the maybe um one of the pivots of moral relativism
What you're
because
saying,
it's
neurosis?
the what?
Neurosis?
Yeah, neurosis, neurotism. Neurotism is like you're not able to control your emotions at
Okay.
all.
Right, right.
So I think this is the one of the biggest thing that hold us back from evolution. It's
Sure.
we're not in control of anything. We think we control things, but we're not in control of anything
That's correct.
but ourselves,
Right.
basically.
The governance that needs to occur internally, and then the failure to do so results in external government. So if we don't want perennial parents from cradle to grave in the form of government, then we're going to have to act like adults and mature on the inside
Yep.
in order for that to manifest on the outside. But these sycophantic, psychopathic, sociopathic politicians are just the manifestation of our own ignorance. So it really has to be dealt with at the ground level. And there's no getting around that. And that's not the children's responsibility to do that. It's the adults. So
Yeah.
that's who we're ultimately going to have to reach.
I almost have to agree on this quote. Um, I think we have the politician that we deserve.
I agree.
I mean, this ignorant and this the culture and the culture is filled with psychopathologies.
That's
I don't
part of
mean
what Romans 13 is really about, by the way. What you
which one.
just said is what the Romans 13, would have meant in its original before it was, Romanized. But that's a very good point that you make. And I would say that, the Romans 13 came out of that and then it was just tilted into man's law as justified.
I mean,
And
we have a complete lack of uh, owning our own responsibility in
that's
the
it.
aggregates.
That's
So
right. And that is the hook. That is the temptation that we could, the idea that we can abdicate that responsibility or give it away to somebody else or have representation. The whole point about it is we cannot afford the luxury of living in a world of proxy. So we can't serve two masters, God and Mammon, both Mammon being money or Mammon being government. We can't abdicate our personal responsibility at the individual level to know truth. So we can't afford the luxury of living in a world of proxy. That's what it comes down to. And Ivan from Phoenix just did a great presentation on that at the Shattering the Illusion conference. And Ivan always has great work. But I actually did a show with Ivan recently on Conan, and we were getting into that. But there was a lot more there than I could deal with. We're gonna have to revisit that one. I'll tell you.
You mean the book or?
No, we broke down the film by
Oh
John
yeah,
Milius. Yeah.
yeah, fascinating. And what
Yeah.
and people, I found it funny because I'm listening to these old movies when I was young, and I was, oh my god, have you seen Dark Crystal?
No, I've heard of the film, but I haven't
Oh
checked it out
my
yet.
god, I was like, I was fucking blown
I
away.
have to be careful because I'm a student of cinematic knowledge, and sometimes these films will just peel my cap right off.
I mean, the archetypes, the
Yeah.
the solar hero, the this symbolism
Well,
in
keep
there.
paying attention to it because it's gonna. The more that's one reason I put emphasis on cinematic language because it's part of how I learned to see the real world by understanding what could express within the frame. So for me, that's been part of my journey, and it does translate over into real life. And I'd like to check out that film, so maybe I will, and we can get together and talk about that one.
Yeah, the comment there. I don't know. I cannot see your name, but uh, I there's someone who knows the movie there. Feeding on people essence. This is
Right,
what the protagonists,
right.
the
The psychic
antagonists were
vampire.
doing.
Yeah,
Exactly.
the archetypal psychic vampire, and they are psychic vampires. They feed on fear, but they are controlled by fear too. They have a master over them, and it is fear, like in Dante's Inferno. Satan is encased in a block of ice at the center of hell.
And, I mean, if you have the time from, just listen to that, man. It's crazy. It's crazy. I have to go back to it,
What are you talking
because
about?
the Dark Crystal movie.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'll check it out.
There's I don't want to spoil it for
No,
you,
don't do that. But yeah, go ahead.
but there's an allusion to androgyny in the movie. It's beautiful, a beautiful movie filled with wisdom, occult wisdom into it. You, y and this is what I bring the up, because this movie, it was made originally for children.
Right.
So you mean there's a balance there. You have the eyes of the initiate, and you have the curiosity and the drive of the children, this
Mhm.
beautiful image, these beautiful puppets that they made, and all these beautiful allegories that into the movie. I need to get
Tim
back to it.
Burton or something like that.
No, what?
Is it Tim Burton?
No, it's Oz, Frank Oz.
Okay.
It's all Muppets, not Muppets, but puppets, and they're fantastic movie. Fantastic movie.
Let me say one thing about androgyny. It's an internal prospect. It's about balance,
Here we go.
and then the perversion or the corruption of that is externalized
And
androgyny. And
Jim Ensign. Jim Ensign,
okay,
not
yeah, he's
Frank
actually
Oz.
the
I
he's
was wrong
actually
about
the
that.
original Muppet Show
Yeah.
creator. But the main thing I want to say about androgyny is it's an internal prospect that's about balance, just like the caduceus is about balance. It's archetypally representing aspects of self that need to be brought into balance, not about changing your sex.
Oh no,
or
it's
morphing your
the
sex. It's not about
yeah,
morphing your gender. It's about internal balance, is what the prospect of internal androgyny is supposed to be about. In a corrupted form, that's going to manifest as externalized
the emergence of the
gen-
fusion of both the
gender
feminine and the
fusion. That's
masculine.
right. That's
Yes,
complete perversion of a spiritual prospect.
and the movie Dracula from Bram Stoker.
Yeah, is that Tom Cruise in that or
No, Keanu Reeves.
oh
Keanu
Keanu
Reeves
Reeves?
and Gary Oldman. Fantastic actor, by the way.
Well, let me mention the vampire myth since you brought that up. Um, the main thing about the vampire myth is it's very important to understand because it has a lot to do with the idea of letting your guard down or not saying no means tacitly saying yes. But it's also a lot to do with the seduction. So the idea that the vampire has no power over you unless you let it into your house is the idea. It corresponds to government. It's like government has no power except the power that we give to it. But what it does is it seduces you to letting your guard down. But the whole idea of the vampire myth, part of the old religion or the old religion that they have is that they have to tell you what they're doing to you before they do it. But it's related to this vampire myth because it's the idea that the vampire has no power over you unless you let it into your house, but it does have the power to seduce you. This is the idea of the devil as a woman in a red dress or things like that. But I wanted to mention that since you brought up Dracula because it's a fascinating subject and it's very relevant to what's happening in our world today.
Oh my God, yes. And I mean, we could talk about movies for another 2 hours, but I would like to stop it there because we're almost 2 hours in,
Yep.
and it has been a fascinating. I've been blown by all your wisdom and your knowledge, and I need to go back again, listen to it, and I suggest the people listen to it. The first part, I was like, I had to take notes. When I'm getting my pen and my paperments because I cannot follow all the way. I need to go back and then go and use my curiosity, my infant uh, curiosity, to get into it again. Um, so thank you very much, Douglas, for sharing your precious time and your wisdom with me and the listeners.
It's always a pleasure to come on here with you, Fred. And I have nothing but respect for you. So anytime you want me to come on, just let me know. I'm
Maybe
there
next
for you.
time we can talk about movies. I know you
Well, yeah,
already did. I know you already did on other podcasts. I stumble upon them,
yeah,
but I would like to get into that a little bit and maybe bring it to another some other people. I'm having French people that are getting in more and more, that are bilingual and they can understand English, and I want everyone to be included in that. Um,
yeah. Ivan's got the show now. A Guy Next Door Speaks. It's kind of a spin off of that show on movies and TV. And it's going to be an ongoing thing. I'm going to help him get that going and get on there as often as I can. But he's going to have other guests, and I'm not. I mean, if you want, if you can end up on that show with us, or maybe we can end up on the Cubby Hill, or I can come on here and we can do one where we talk about movies. But if movies come up during the course of the philosophical discussions, that's not a problem. Whatever we can do to express these ideas and expedite these ideas, I'm all for that. So
expressing this, I think movies are a beautiful way to express emotions and knowledge, and I
absolutely,
mean, it's another in all other subject.
it's our most advanced language. So let me say that.
Awesome. Yeah.
Cinematic language is our most advanced expression potential. So it is a genuine language and it's our most advanced language. So that's why it has been part of my experience and part of my journey and part of my understanding of things. So I
So
encourage people to do it.
yes. So if you want, you could plug your stuff there. If you have a website, a YouTube page, or something, just plug it there so people can go see your work.
Sure. You can find my work at thecubbyhole.com with Nate, Cap, and Brandon Martin. We all have work on the Cubbyhole, and that's where my main body of work is. But I also have most of my work on the One Great Work Network, and there's a lot of other great content creators there that you can flesh out. And I recommend you visit both of those websites and flesh them out. You'll find a lot of good information there. And it's been a real pleasure to come on here with you again, Fred, and talk about this stuff.
Thank you, Douglas. Thank you, everyone. Merci à tout le monde. Les Franco qui ont écouté, qui se sont rendus jusqu'au bout de l'émission. Kudos à vous autres. Thank you, everyone, for being there and supporting again. I'm repeating myself, but this is what I feel. So much gratitude for you people. And the next thing, it's going to be on Friday at 9 p.m. It's going to be the table discussion. And we're going to have, as usual, a bunch of great workers, awesome workers that's going to be there to talk about fascinating subject and having good deep conversation together. So it's going to be on Friday. The next thing, it's going to be on Tuesday next week. I'm going to have Maria West to talk about fake great workers and all these things. It's going to be awesome. I'm looking forward to it. I think she called it poser. So it's gonna be great. And then after that, I'm having Odysseus to talk about shadow work. So be there next week. So take care, people. Have a good night.